Hannah gently washed the green fabric of her elf outfit, removing any traces of glitter and dust from her day at the mall. She gave special care to the pointed hat with its playful jingle bell, wanting it to look festive. After ensuring every sequin shined and the outfit was clean, she hung it to dry, straightening it to prevent wrinkles. She eagerly looked forward to her next shift. Being an elf at Greenwood Mall during the holidays was a job she cherished. The bright lights, the massive Christmas tree, and the joyful music added to the charm. Yet, seeing the happiness on kids' faces as they met Santa was her favorite part. With her outfit set aside, she daydreamed about the next day, envisioning kids laughing, the scent of hot cocoa, and snowflakes outside the mall windows. The holidays felt magical, and Hannah was happy to be part of it. Hey Facebook, it's Stinky the Elf, straight from the snowy North Pole. With my jingling hat and a twinkle in my eye, I've braved the cold and a grumpy Santa to get this chat. Here's Santa Claus. Say hello, Santa. Hannah's voice was full of joy. Steve, a plump man with a white beard, looked puzzled. What's happening? He asked, glancing at the camera. We're on Facebook Live, Hannah explained, her eyes gleaming. What's that? All my friends can see us, so wave. Hello. Hi, everyone. Now, Santa, I know you're swamped, especially with the elves making gifts, but can we chat for a moment? All right. Santa sighed. Great. First question. How do you visit all the houses in one night? Magic, Santa declared. Got that, everyone. Next, what's the best Christmas gift you've received? Santa pondered. Not sure. Could it be the smiles of all the children? Yes, that's it, Santa agreed. Fantastic answer, Santa. Now, many are eager to see you. How can they meet you up close? There is no real need, right? Well, they can always visit us at the center court of Greenwood Mall. We'll be there daily from 10 to 6, all the way to Christmas Eve. Isn't that so, Santa? That's right. Oh, ho, ho. Santa chuckled. It's Dinky the Elf saying goodbye. Thanks for tuning in. This is silly, Steve, the man portraying Santa, mumbled. Lighten up, Steve. Embrace the holiday cheer, Hannah urged. It just feels so belittling. Hannah maintained her smile, saying, Every role has its dignity, even Santa. Her expression turned serious. Maybe you need a shift in perspective. Steve smirked and began to walk away, but Hannah persisted. Put in some heart, Steve. Suddenly, Steve looked angry. I know how to play Santa. Don't school me. All right. Steve rose from his seat, his red suit rustling. Where are you off to? Hannah inquired. To the restroom. You just went. Steve grumbled. I'm old. I have to go often. Hannah stepped closer, concern evident. Steve, are you sneaking in drinks again? Steve sounded defensive. No, I'm not. If Rudy catches you drinking, he'll let you go. I told you I'm sober. Trust me. The two parted, Steve's footsteps echoing in the mall, leaving Hannah pondering with doubt. Hannah cherished her role as a Greenwood Mall elf, despite it being a short-term gig. It was her favorite among the various jobs she had held since leaving her Aunt Lily's home. Lucy, Hannah's mother, died when Hannah was just 17. The identity of her father remained a mystery. Lucy would brush off Hannah's questions, claiming he was a minor figure in her past. As a child, Hannah never quite understood her mother's vague responses. After Lucy's passing, Hannah went to live with her Aunt Lily, a unique character with a fondness for cats. When Hannah arrived, Lily had set terms. She could stay until 18, but after that, she was on her own. Hannah and Lily shared a house, but not much else. Their interactions were minimal, mostly confined to household chores. But one question always lingered in Hannah's mind. Who was her father? Lily's response was vague. She had mentioned Lucy's unsettled life during that period, hinting at Hannah's unplanned arrival. But Hannah never felt unwanted. Lucy had showered her with love and life lessons. Hannah owed much to Lucy. Her mother had instilled in her the values of kindness and resilience, guiding her to believe that good deeds would always lead to success. Living on her own made Hannah adaptable and enterprising. She wore many hats, from waitress to dog walker, always infusing each job with her signature spirit. The role of an elf was her favorite, but she was realistic. The festive season would end, and she'd be on the lookout for a new opportunity. Steve, playing the role of Santa, found himself in a lively bar, rock music blaring and patrons chattering loudly. "Want another?" the bartender asked. "If you're offering," Steve replied, trying to sound carefree. His phone buzzed, interrupting him. He groaned, recognizing the caller ID. "Oh, it's her again. Hello." "Steve, where the heck are you?" "I had to head home, feeling a bit under the weather," he lied. "Steve," her voice sharp, Hannah retorted. "I can hear the background. You're at a bar." "What should I tell Rudy this time?" Steve exhaled, sounding defeated. "Just tell him I quit. Maybe he can hire some robot Santa for them all." "That's not funny, Steve. I'm not covering for you." "I've got to go," Steve said quickly, hoping to escape the situation. "Steve, if you keep this up, both of us will..." Steve ended the call before she could finish, sighing deeply. "Just great." The bartender slid another drink his way. "On the house, pal." Steve forced a smile. "Thanks. Merry Christmas." The bartender grinned. "Merry Christmas. Try to hang in there." Steve's stint as a mall Santa wasn't his first venture with Hannah. It was the third. He was a solitary, elderly man, and the bottle had been his companion for far too long. His wife, Rose, had been the anchor of his life. They'd navigated the stormy waters of her health together, battling one illness after another until cancer finally claimed her. Yet Steve believed it was more than just the cancer. He felt Rose's spirit had been chipped away by the underlying sadness of never becoming a mother. In his heart, he harbored the guilt of not providing her with the family she'd so deeply yearned for. Every drink he took was an attempt to drown that guilt, to numb the pain, but it remained an unhealed wound in his soul. Rose often felt the weight of her infertility bearing down on her, driving her to suggest that Steve would be better off without her. She believed he deserved a life filled with the laughter of children, a life she felt she couldn't provide. However, Steve never wavered in his commitment. To him, their love was the primary bond, and children, though a cherished idea, were secondary. He would often tell Rose, "We can't measure our life's worth by what we don't have. Our love is enough." He would cradle Rose's face in his hands, looking deep into her eyes, reminding her that love wasn't about filling checkboxes. "If children weren't in our cards, then so be it," he would say. "We have each other, and that's a blessing many seek but never find." For Steve, Rose was his compass, his anchor. She was his treasured Rose, a name that encapsulated his feelings for her. Steve and Rose's initial encounter was nothing short of serendipitous. On that fateful day at the bus stop, Steve couldn't help but be drawn to Rose, who was patiently waiting for her ride. An unexplainable confidence welled up in him, making him believe he'd found his soulmate. While Rose spent her days at a meatpacking plant, Steve worked hard at a steel mill. Mustering up the courage, Steve approached Rose, asking with an endearing awkwardness, "Can I wait for the bus with you?" Rose looked up, a hint of surprise evident in her eyes. She considered his question, deeming it both strange and oddly sweet. Upon the bus's arrival, they climbed aboard together, despite it not being Steve's route. Engrossed in conversation, the journey flew by, and before they knew it, Steve was walking Rose to her front door. Steve was a down-to-earth fellow, never really diving deep into the world of romance, but with Rose, it felt different. He was certain she was the one. For 23 harmonious years, the couple lived life's ups and downs, largely undisturbed by the void left by their inability to have children. However, with time, the topic resurfaced, casting a shadow over their bliss. The issue became a recurrent theme of their disagreements. Sometimes, in a surge of guilt and emotion, Rose would urge Steve to move on, find someone who could give him the family she couldn't. She occasionally instigated disagreements, hoping Steve would leave. In a particularly heated moment of anger and frustration, Steve sought solace in the bar. A series of poor decisions followed, culminating in a night with a stranger. The morning brought sobriety and intense remorse, but he couldn't muster the courage to confess. Some years down the line, an anonymous envelope arrived. Inside was a photo of a toddler girl, her innocent eyes staring back at Steve. The message on the back read, "This is your daughter. I don't blame you, thank you, and don't look for us." This revelation deepened Steve's pool of guilt. While he yearned to know more about the mysterious woman and the child, he buried the secret deep within, never sharing it with Rose. When the dark cloud of cancer hovered over Rose, Steve was shattered. Despite his utmost efforts and unwavering support, he couldn't save her. With her loss, loneliness consumed him, and the bottle became his escape, a brief respite from the relentless pain and guilt. The habit soon consumed him, and before he realized it, he was jobless, no longer working at the mill. Sometimes, to feel close to his wife, he'd sift through her belongings. On one such day, he stumbled upon a photograph. Waves of guilt and sorrow washed over him. He tormented himself thinking he hadn't done enough to save his wife and had failed to discover what had become of his daughter. Feeling powerless and wanting to keep a part of her close, he tucked the photograph into his wallet, where it remained. Life seemed bleak for Steve, but things took a turn when Hannah knocked on his door. She was house-sitting for a friend who was traveling abroad when suddenly the lights went out. Fearing she had caused it, she approached her only neighbor's house for help. From behind the door, a gruff voice answered, "What do you want?" A little taken aback, Hannah responded, "Hello, sir. I'm staying next door. My lights went out. Is your power working? Could you help me, please?" "No," came the brusque reply. With a hint of confusion and disappointment, Hannah said, "All right, thanks anyway." She started to descend the stairs, heading towards the sidewalk, when the door creaked open, revealing an elderly man. "Out of all the houses, you had to knock on mine?" the man grumbled, his expression hinting at a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Within 10 minutes, Steve was examining the circuit breakers, flashlight in hand. "What were you up to before the lights went off?" Steve inquired. "Not much, really. I was just ironing," Hannah replied. "Show me the iron." Upon inspection, they discovered that the iron's cord had become twisted and frayed over time. The exposed wires had touched, causing a short circuit and plunging the house into darkness. Once the lights flickered back to life, Hannah, feeling grateful, invited Steve over for coffee. She took note of his tattered clothing, unkempt appearance, and the unmistakable odor of alcohol. These signs painted a picture of a man going through tough times. As they sipped their coffee, Hannah's curiosity bubbled to the surface. "So, what's your story?" she ventured. Steve shot her a wary glance. "You're a nosy one, aren't you? My life ain't a topic for discussion." Hannah raised her hands in a gesture of surrender. "All right, take it easy." As Steve prepared to leave, Hannah said, "Look, if you ever need anything or just someone to talk to, I'm here." He responded with silence and a slight nod, then walked away. Over the next few weeks, Hannah often found herself observing Steve's home during her daily commute. Steve, despite his rough exterior, seemed like a genuinely kind old soul. Hannah, always affable and easygoing, found it easy to strike up conversations with strangers, a skill she credited to her years working as a waitress. She couldn't shake the feeling that Steve was harboring some deep-seated pain, and she hoped, in time, she could help him share it. Hannah was employed as a cook at a local fast food joint. One day, her manager mentioned the need for additional hands on deck. An idea sprouted in her mind. This could be an opportunity to extend help to Steve, the reclusive old man. Maybe a job could give him a sense of purpose. Determined, she made her way to his home, but with every step, apprehension gnawed at her. Would he see this as an intrusion or an act of kindness? She rapped on his door. Silence. She knocked again, louder this time, straining her ears for any sound from within. But all was still. Hesitantly, she tried the doorknob, finding it surprisingly unlocked. The scene inside was disheartening. The pungent aroma of stale alcohol hung heavily in the room. Steve lay sprawled on his couch, having succumbed to a drunken slumber the night before. His television played reruns of old shows, casting a flickering glow on the countless empty bottles that littered the floor around him. Steve was roused from his slumber by the clinking and clattering from the kitchen. The pounding in his head from last night's binge seemed louder than before. A brief wave of hope washed over him. Maybe, just maybe, he'd been in a prolonged dream, and his beloved wife was still alive, cooking breakfast like old times. But the familiar aroma of her cooking wasn't what filled the room. Instead, a different yet delightful scent hung in the air. He pushed himself to his feet and ambled to the kitchen, but the face that greeted him wasn't the one he yearned for. "Morning, Mr. Douglas," Hannah chirped brightly, continuing her culinary activities. He squinted at her, a mixture of confusion and realization dawning on him. He took a few steps back, surveying the living room, which was unrecognizable. Gone were the heaps of clutter, replaced by a sense of order he hadn't seen in ages. Near the entrance, black bags likely filled with discarded bottles and pizza boxes hinted at Hannah's cleaning spree. Pausing before a mirror, he took in his disheveled appearance. His fingers grazed his unkempt beard, and he muttered a soft, "Oh, man." From the kitchen, Hannah's voice called out, "Mr. Douglas, would you like to freshen up? Food will be ready in about 10 minutes. Without uttering a word, Steve made his way to the bathroom. After showering, Steve joined Hannah for a hearty lunch. Throughout the meal, his demeanor varied between childlike petulance and brief moments of amusement. However, Hannah remained undeterred. She saw past his external gruffness, sensing a kind heart overshadowed by a tumultuous past. After some casual chatter, she decided it was time to share her idea with him. 2 days later, Steve found himself working side by side with Hannah. The regimen of a steady job, which required him to rise early and commit 5 days a week, was a stark change from his recent lifestyle. Adjusting to his newer routine proved challenging, and every morning, like clockwork, Hannah was at his door, nudging him awake and ensuring he was prepared for the day ahead. However, one fateful morning, after a night of heavy drinking, Steve bolted his door from the inside. Hannah's persistent knocking yielded no response. At work, she scrambled for an explanation to cover for his absence. Later that evening, she confronted Steve about his behavior. He sheepishly apologized, vowing not to repeat it. Yet the scenario played out again just a week later. It hadn't escaped the notice of Hannah's boss that Steve sometimes reeked of alcohol when he arrived for his shift. This last incident was the final straw. Despite Hannah's plea, Steve was let go. "Foolishness," Steve shouted, anger evident in his voice. "Who needs that pitiful $6 an hour?" Hannah paused, taking a deep breath to calm herself. "Listen, Steve," she began gently. "I have a backup idea. If the restaurant isn't your scene, I've got a different angle. The festive season's around the corner, and I'll be working as an elf at the mall." She shot him a mischievous grin. "Now, look at you. The age, the beard. Ever thought about playing Santa?" Despite his initial reluctance, Steve couldn't ignore the genuine concern and determination in Hannah's eyes, and even though he was far from thrilled about the idea, he finally agreed, swayed by Hannah's unwavering support. Steve was nursing his fourth drink in a lively bar. Glancing around, he noticed an unusually high number of patrons dressed as Santa. Chuckling to himself, he inquired about the phenomenon to the bartender, a young woman who was grinning ear to ear. "Oh, those are college kids from the local university," she said, her eyes gleaming with glee. "Every year they dress up as Santas and go on a bar crawl. Good for me. They've been tipping like crazy tonight." Steve, unfamiliar with this tradition, found the entire scene amusing. "Sounds like a fun night for you," he remarked. Just then, a wobbly college student, his Santa hat askew, stumbled to the counter. "Can I get another carbon?" he slurred. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "You might have had enough, buddy," she cautioned. The student, eager to prove himself, began walking an imaginary straight line, adding in some hops for good measure. Midway through, he lost his balance and crumpled to the ground. Grinning sheepishly, he admitted, "Okay, maybe I'm a bit plastered," as he clambered to his feet, using Steve's shoulder for support. Steve, trying to defuse the situation, gently advised, "Maybe pace yourself, young man." Eyes wide, the student took a moment to really look at Steve. "Dude, you look legit. That beard, those glasses, you got the full Santa vibe going on. And here I am, with just this cheap coat and hat. Mind if I feel that beard?" Steve raised a hand defensively. "Back off, kid." Undeterred, the student continued, How about a quick sit on Santa's lap then? Steve was starting to lose his patience. Enough with the antics. In a last-ditch attempt, the student waved at the bartender. One more car bomb for me and my new Santa buddy here. Steve quickly intervened. I'm good, thanks. Just take it easy tonight, all right? The student, still in high spirits, beckoned for Steve to join his rowdy crew, making the night all the more memorable. Steve was doing his best to block out the young Santa imposter's antics, hoping the kid would soon lose interest. Eventually, the tipsy student admitted he needed to go relieve himself of some of the night's indulgences and promised to return for another round. Steve chuckled, then refocused his attention on the bartender. You know, Jill, Steve began, addressing the bartender with a hint of melancholy. I've had my share of ups and downs, lost some, gained some. Never imagined I'd be playing Santa at this stage of my life. Yet here I am, in this red suit, drinking away the night. Shaking his head, he said, Excuse me a moment, and made his way to the restroom. While washing his hands, Steve took a long look at himself in the mirror, water dripping from his grizzled beard. He muttered, Enough with the self-pity, old man. Just as he was about to leave, a soft groan echoed from one of the stalls. Concerned, Steve approached the door. Hey, are you okay in there? Buddy, can you hear me? Getting no coherent response, Steve warned, I'm coming in, all right? He swung the stall door open to find the boisterous student sprawled on the floor, drunkenly declaring himself the king of shots. Steve sighed. Sure you are, but right now, you need to head home. The kid weakly protested, wanting to stay and party. Steve pulled out his phone, attempting to call a taxi. However, when he asked for the young man's address, the reply was the name of a town considerable distance away. Frustrated, Steve pressed. Who are you with? Someone has to take you home. The student's only answer was a deep drunken snore. Steve, exasperated, but not wanting to leave the boy unattended, stepped out into the main area of the bar to seek help. Hey, does anyone know the young guy from the bathroom? Anyone familiar with him? Steve shouted over the din of the bar. Most people just stared, some pointing with amusement. Look, Santa's here. Anyone? The car bomb guy? Steve persisted. Oh, that dude? No clue, but he's a riot. A group cheered, lifting their glasses in a toast. Amidst the noise, Steve tried to convey the urgency of getting the young man home. Outside, the cool night air was a welcome relief from the stifling bar. Steve and the inebriated student sat on a nearby bench, waiting. A distant train whistle pierced the silence. That's your train, buddy, Steve began, trying to ensure the student understood. Once you're on board, hand the conductor your ticket. Ask him to remind you of your stop. Got it? The kid murmured an indistinct, uh-huh. Wanting clarity, Steve pressed. Can you repeat that back to me? Again, the same vague, uh-huh came in response. Steve heaved a sigh, concern evident on his face. He wasn't confident the young man would manage to get home safely in his current state. Suddenly, the student mumbled, I think I'm gonna be sick. Reacting quickly, Steve grabbed the student's Santa hat, holding it out for him to use. After the young man finished, he seemed momentarily revived. Seeing this, Steve declared, All right, looks like you're feeling a bit better. Time for us to part ways. No sooner had the words left his mouth, the student was sick again. Really? Steve sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The soft hum of conversations and clinking dishes served as background noise in the cozy diner. As the steam rose from their freshly refilled coffee mugs, the waiter passed by with a nod. Here, take my toast, Ethan, Steve urged, pushing the plate towards him. I'm all right, really, but thanks. Trust me, you'll thank me later. It'll help settle your stomach. Eat. Ethan reluctantly took a bite, and as he chewed, Steve probed deeper. You live with your folks, right? Yeah, but they're out of town right now. On a Christmas vacation without their son? That's unusual, Steve noted. Ethan shrugged. Honestly, they're jerks for leaving me behind. Steve leaned back, taking a sip from his cup. Well, you should still appreciate having them around. Ethan looked up, annoyance clear on his face. They're not really there for me, you know? Steve raised an eyebrow. Sounds like they provide for you. Ethan scoffed. Only because it makes them feel good. My dad's obsessed with money, and my mom, she just likes the idea of having me around. Probably to brag to her friends or something. You might think that, Steve countered. But at the end of the day, they're still your family. Ethan rolled his eyes, his frustration apparent. Family that never cared. After I dropped out, they pretty much gave up on me. I hang out at bars, parties, whatever. If they cared, they'd have shown it. Steve nodded, understanding the depth of the young man's pain. Steve saw a bit of himself in Ethan, a younger version filled with resentment and pain. As they talked, the two found comfort in their shared experiences, and the hours flew by. The first rays of dawn peeked through the diner's windows. Noticing how tired Ethan looked, Steve made an offer. Hey, if you don't want to head home just yet, you can crash at my place. I've work at 11, and I hope they haven't let me go after last night. But you can get some sleep, and when you leave, just place the keys under the mat. Ethan looked at Steve, a mix of gratitude and embarrassment in his eyes. I can't believe you're being this kind to a stranger, but honestly, I could use a place to rest. It's no trouble at all, Ethan. Let's help each other out. It wasn't just kindness that motivated Steve. He saw in Ethan a chance to make a difference, much like Hannah had done for him. He hoped that offering Ethan a safe place to rest might be the first step in helping him find a better path. Deep down, Steve knew that this gesture was also a way of honoring Hannah's impact on his life. Even though he'd never explicitly thanked her, he recognized the change she had brought in him. Helping Ethan felt like a way to pay that kindness forward. Steve's house came into view, and to his surprise, he saw Hannah patiently waiting on the porch steps. You took the world's longest bathroom break, she remarked with a hint of teasing in her voice, yet her eyes clearly showed concern. Steve rubbed the back of his neck, feeling guilty. I messed up, Hannah. Ended up at a bar. I figured as much, she replied. Just wasn't sure which one. And your boss? What did you tell him? I said you had a blood pressure spike. Seemed plausible enough? Steve sighed in relief. You're a lifesaver, Hannah. Oh, this is Ethan, by the way. Met him at the bar. He'll be resting at my place for a bit. Ethan and Hannah exchanged nods and smiles, a quiet understanding passing between them. You all set for work? Steve inquired, trying to gauge Hannah's mood. Hannah chuckled softly. I'm always ready. The question is, are you? Steve met her eyes earnestly. Today's different, Hannah. I promise it won't happen again. And it genuinely was different. At work, Steve was a burst of energy and joy. Children flocked to him, their eyes wide with wonder, and he whispered enchanting tales, making them laugh and dream. Despite the sleepless night, he was animated, like he'd found a renewed purpose. Watching from a distance, Hannah felt a mix of astonishment and pride. It was as if Steve had undergone a transformation overnight. The weary man she knew was replaced by someone brimming with life and hope. The mall was buzzing with visitors that day, adding to the merry atmosphere. Hannah, playing her part as an elf, was also having a blast, entertaining kids with her antics. As their workday wound down, Steve and Hannah exchanged a glance, their eyes sparkling with shared joy. You were on fire today, Steve, Hannah remarked, her voice filled with admiration. Honestly, seeing you like that was the highlight of my day. Steve shrugged with false humility, his eyes twinkling. Always been this way. Guess you just hadn't noticed. Hannah giggled. Oh, stop it. Her tone grew tender. But seriously, it's good to have you back. He understood the depth of her sentiment. Thank you, Hannah. It took me a while, but you helped me see. You deserved it, she replied softly. To celebrate the day's success, Steve decided to treat Hannah to some hot cocoa. They ventured out into the brisk evening, finding a nearby coffee stand. After ordering their drinks, Steve reached into his pocket to pay. Only found was a lone $2 bill. Hannah noticed his predicament and began to reach for her own wallet. Wait, I've got this, Steve said, shaking his wallet a bit. A handful of coins tumbled out, followed by an old photograph which fluttered to the snowy ground. Hannah bent down to gather the fallen items. As she picked up the photograph, her cheerful expression turned to one of bewilderment. She looked at Steve, her eyes filled with questions. Accepting the picture from her, Steve placed it carefully back in his wallet. She's someone very special to me. Hannah hesitated, then finally asked, "Why did you find this picture?" Steve noticed her serious tone. "Why the change in mood, Hannah?" He took a deep breath. "That's a photo of my daughter when she was young. I never got the chance to really know her." Hannah's gaze was intense, almost searching, as she looked at Steve. He felt slightly off balance under her scrutiny. As they continued their walk, sipping their drinks, the silence between them grew thicker. Hannah, usually lively and talkative, seemed lost in her thoughts. Every so often, she'd glance at Steve, her brow furrowed, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. She seemed to be searching his features, looking for answers. Feeling the weight of the silence, Steve decided to break it. "Hey, you've been quiet. Everything okay, Hannah?" She walked a few more steps before stopping and turning to face him. Her voice was soft, filled with emotion. "Did you ever try to find her? Your daughter?" Steve was taken aback. The dim evening light hid the tears brimming in her eyes. "Well, I didn't know much about her mother. It was a surprise to even learn about my daughter. When her mother sent me that photo, she also made it clear she didn't want me involved." Hannah took a deep breath, her emotions swirling. She was on the verge of saying something, but she hesitated, leaving Steve with a sense of mystery. Steve paused, searching for the right words. "That's it, Hannah. That's the whole story." The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever, yet Hannah's expression changed from sadness to a growing warmth and realization. It dawned on her that the man she had grown so fond of was her father. As they turned onto a better-lit street, Hannah halted, looking deeply into Steve's eyes. She began rummaging through her purse, her voice shaking but filled with conviction. "Growing up without a father was hard, but I've always believed I'd meet you one day." From her purse, she took out an enlarged version of the same photograph Steve carried. Tears glistened in her eyes as she showed it to him. Steve was rendered speechless. The realization hit him hard. The little things he hadn't picked up on before made sense now. Hannah's eyes, her smile, they mirrored his own. Overwhelmed, Steve pulled her close, holding his daughter for the first time. In the cold winter air, amidst the soft glow of streetlights, Steve looked heavenwards. He whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, his heart full. The Christmas had indeed brought a miracle. Steve and Hannah stepped into his home, immediately greeted by the enticing aroma of spices. "Steve, hope you're good with spicy dishes. I found some chicken in the fridge and thought of whipping up an Indian curry." Ethan's voice echoed from the kitchen. Instead of leaving as Steve had expected, Ethan had chosen to stay and show gratitude. He wanted to repay Steve's kindness with a warm meal. "You didn't have to do that," Steve called back, genuinely touched. "Who was the girl from this morning?" Ethan's voice rang out again, filled with curiosity. "Any reason?" Steve responded, a teasing glint in his eye as he exchanged smiles with Hannah. Clearly, Ethan had no idea she was with him. "She seemed interesting," Ethan replied a bit sheepishly. Steve beamed at Hannah, who playfully rolled her eyes. Ethan, apron-clad, emerged from the kitchen, starting to speak even before he fully saw who was in the room. "I was thinking, maybe I could..." But upon laying eyes on Hannah and Steve laughing heartily, he couldn't help but join in, his cheeks slightly reddened. "You both... you got me," Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Ethan," Steve began, wrapping an arm around Hannah's shoulder. "This is Hannah, my elf assistant, and also my daughter." The atmosphere inside Steve's house was filled with warmth and laughter. Steve was in high spirits, cracking jokes and laughing heartily. Meanwhile, Ethan and Hannah slowly got acquainted, asking each other questions and sharing stories, weaving a new connection. After a hearty meal, they all settled around the table for some card games, enjoying the camaraderie. As it got late, Steve, feeling the weight of the day, suggested the younger pair should call it a night soon. While Ethan and Hannah cleared the dishes, sharing soft conversations, Steve stepped out onto the porch, immersing himself in the cool serenity of the night. A gentle breeze brushed against his face, but his heart felt warm and light. He had finally found the peace he had been yearning for. With a newfound family and a strengthened bond, Steve felt hopeful and certain that his future would be filled with joy and tranquility. He looked up, the stars shimmering like diamonds, and in silent gratitude thanked the heavens above for the blessing